Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à notre session de la CAF présente, les webinaires du mercredi. As usual, I am Danny Richard, ACFO President. Happy to be here with you again, friends. Today we'll be discussing about the National Joint Council. I don't know about you, but when I first became president for ACFO, I got to learn a lot more about the NJC. But as a member, as an FI, I wasn't really aware of what they did, who they were, what they were responsible for. So I'm very happy that today we have Sean Ross, General Secretary for the NJC. Good morning, Sean.
Good afternoon, Danny. Thanks for the opportunity. Happy to be with you.
Right. Good afternoon. You're right. It's afternoon. Thanks. Before we get to Sean's presentation, friends, just an update again, as we normally do on COVID-19. So the good news is there are more and more departments that are looking into PSPC's $500 allowance or credit regarding non-IT equipment. I personally myself have reached out to many CFOs to see, is this something they see themselves doing moving forward, offering credits to employees for them to get that non-IT equipment, a chair, a desk, because as I speak to the CFOs, it's becoming more and more apparent that we're going to be teleworking for the foreseeable future. So more to follow on that one. Also want to mention, you may have heard last Friday, the Public Service Alliance of Canada had reached a tentative agreement. Details were disclosed on our website. We've received questions on this at a CFO. So we've posted on Monday, we held a live Q&A session. Some of you that are watching right now may have attended this one. So if you have any questions regarding this settlement and what it means for us, because if you remember, we had a catch-up clause that meant that if anyone got something different or better, we could actually make sure we're not penalized. So that does trigger this one. So if you want to see that video, if you go on our website right now, ACFO, on our news feed, you can just click on the tentative agreement and you'll see the video link right there. There's very useful information because I think you need to compare all the details, not just what you hear in the media. Going back to the National Joint Council. So the reason we asked Sean to come here today, well, first of all, he's the General Secretary. He's the head of the NJC, is because we want you guys to understand how ACFO advocates on your behalf on many aspects, right? And some of it we negotiate through a collective agreement, which is us, only ACFO, dealing with you guys, the members, and then with the employer. But there are other things that we have to negotiate with the employer, but along with the other bargaining agents. So we thought it would be good for have Sean here to really start and demystify who the NJC is. So Sean is, as I said, General Secretary at the NJC. He's also, look, had a flourishing career. He worked for Treasury Board as well for a while before he actually his role at General Secretary. So Sean, welcome, and over to you for your presentation.
All right. Thanks so much, Danny. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the ACFO membership about the National Joint Council. So I have some slides that'll probably take about 10-15 minutes to go through, and of course want to reserve as much time as possible for a good conversation on the questions and answers from the membership. C'est sûr que la majorité des diapositives sont probablement en anglais, sauf que ça va me faire un plaisir de répondre aux questions dans la langue officielle de choix. So as you've noted, Danny, the NJC has been around for a long time, actually 75 years. We celebrated our 75th anniversary last year. But we do know that too often folks like yourself don't fully appreciate or understand all that happens under its umbrella. So, and more importantly, the impact it has on public servants in their everyday workday lives. So really the objective is to spend about 15 minutes, as I said. I want to provide that outline about what we're all about, and then talk more specifically to the membership about their questions. So as you'll see from the slide, so there's a variety of activities that take place under the auspices of the NJC. So whether it's information sharing, the employer has something that they're working on, they want to share that information before it gets rolled out. Consultation, of course, on different initiatives that are underway. The pandemic, of course, has lent itself to lots of consultations. And then there's co-development. So that's where we really roll up our sleeves collectively and develop products that have an application that's service-wide. So that happens under the cyclical review process. I'll get into that a bit later on. There are also appeals that happen under the DI, Disability Insurance and Dental care plan. So there's 2 boards of management. We'll hear from individuals that have an issue with a claim that they've submitted. And of course, there are grievance hearings that occur, and those are grievances that are a result of the application of the directives that are negotiated. So there's about $2 billion in payments and allowances that are paid out to public servants every year as a result of the directives. And as public servants, I'm sure many of the membership have been in receipt of these allowances, and maybe some of this also impacts their dependents. So that gives you an idea of the breadth and the scope. So just on the next slide, le Conseil national mixte a été identifié il y a longtemps par les partis comme la tribune de choix, comme je viens de dire, pour l'échange d'informations, soit la consultation ou l'élaboration conjointe, avec essentiellement les partis, l'employeur, le Conseil du Trésor, ça soit avec tous les agents négociateurs qui font partie du Conseil national mixte. Et puis, sous l'égide du Conseil national mixte, travaille à résoudre des problèmes et définir des conditions d'emploi. C'est vraiment des conditions d'emploi ici, des choses qu'on retrouve dans la convention collective. Donc, on pense à la directive sur les voyages en service commandé. On a la réinstallation, l'aide au transport quotidien. La liste, elle est longue, puis elle inclut, bien sûr, une panoplie de directives sur la santé et la sécurité. Puis, je vous assure qu'il y a eu beaucoup de discussions depuis la pandémie à ce niveau-là. So, like, from a public health and safety point of view, the NGC OSH directives are looming large right now. And of course, there is the bilingualism bonus and the health care plan. Again, the largest plan in the country, are very close to it. So we'll get into some discussion, but it gives people an understanding of the breadth and scope of what's happening under the NJC and why it's important or should be looked at as an important forum. So on the next slide, I just want to get into that a bit more. So, like, this is intended to give you a quick idea of the impact of the NJC directives on the public service. So you see the list there. All of these directives, except for the dental care plan and disability insurance plan, form part of the collective agreement. So they're enshrined in the collective agreements, and they're looked at from time to time through a cyclical review process. So generally every 3 years, we'll crack those directives open, and each of the unions that are involved with the NJC has the opportunity then to bring forward recommendations for changes, from the membership. And of course, the employer will do the same thing. As I mentioned, so about $2 billion in allowances and payments are resulting from the NJC directives. To give you a little better sense, so under the healthcare plan, these are figures from about a year ago. There was $1.4 billion that was spent to over 1.4 million participants and on the travel directive, the number was around $722 million. Other significant areas include $116 million for dental benefits, $38 million for allowances for folks who are working and living in isolated post locations, $163 million in foreign service allowances for employees that are serving abroad. So I don't want to bore you with all the numbers, but I thought it was an easy way to give some perspective. So again, the magnitude of what the NJC is all about. Donc, prochaine diapo, s'il te plaît, next slide. So ici, c'est, je présente l'organigramme pour vous être un peu mieux à la situation. On compte maintenant 19 syndicats, ainsi que 5 employeurs parmi nos rangs. So the NJC is basically got 19 members on the bargaining agent side. The Treasury Board, of course, has the principal employer, but there are 4 separate agencies as well that are members of the NJC, le Centre de sécurité de télécommunications, CISEC, Bureau du Directeur général, Conseil national de recherche, et l'Agence d'inspection des aliments, so the CFIA as well. So basically, that's the council. You got about 24 players around that table. They meet collectively 4 times a year. Obviously, there's lots of work to be done, so that gets delegated to the NJC Executive Committee. So they're empowered by council to act on their behalf in between meetings of council. So you've got a chair, who's Sandra Hassan from the Treasury Board Secretariat, and a co-chair, Jean-Marc Noël, currently. He has, been elected by his peers at the on the bargaining agent side, and of course the Alliance and the Professional Institute are also represented, as are a couple other representatives from the employer side. So 6 people, a couple of side secretaries as well. The side secretaries, of course, manage the operational side of things, and then there's myself, who's the general secretary, and I'm the neutral, and I'm there to facilitate and assist with the discussions. Il y a aussi plusieurs comités de travail. So pour chacune des directives, comme on a vu tantôt, il y a un comité de travail. Le comité de travail, c'est eux qui sont chargés de faire le gros du travail. So they really do the heavy lifting, the working committees do. Essentially, they're looking at the directives, they're updating the directives when the cyclical review is underway, they're providing interpretations, and moreover, they're the ones that hear the grievance hearing. So when there's the executive committee receives a grievance, they'll often hand it to the working committee for a hearing, so that then that recommendation will form part of the final decision. We'll talk a bit about that in a further slide. There are also times when something will come up where there isn't really a place where it fits specifically, and the parties will agree to set up a standing committee, donc un comité de groupe de travail. In the case of the Employee Assistance Program, that's how it happened. The precursor to the PSAC Joint Learning Program was developed through the NGC. We've had discussions on daycare, just to give you a sense of the sort of ad hoc type things that can happen. And then, of course, there are 2 boards of management. Like I say, the boards of management for dental and disability insurance are really charged at looking at the plan experience, its financial situation, but also they hear appeals from individual employees who've not, been compensated per the terms of the plans. So, of course, l'Association Canadienne des Agents Financiers, so ACFO, is well represented within the structure through your president, Danny, at the National Joint Council, council meeting proper. And of course, there are representations or representatives on the different working groups from the organization. And there's a good mix. So each of these committees is made up of volunteers from each side. So whether on the bargaining agent side or on the employer side, they're chaired by a neutral third party who basically is there just to facilitate the conversation, act as a neutral. There's somebody from the NGC Secretariat staff, but I wanted just to emphasize that, the unions are well represented and it's a collective. So they operate as a side. So when you come into the NGC committee, you sort of park your organizational hat and you put on the more global hat, which is to look at the issue as a collective side. So the bargaining agent side will have a view on a particular issue, and the employer side will do the same. And it's a process, like I said, that's worked quite well over the years. So just getting into some of the detail on the next slide. When we talk about dispute resolution, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I thought it was important to talk about the redress process, because it's quite unique when you think about the NGC grievance process. They're heard by a joint committee, as I was just explaining. So these are the folks that generally have negotiated the directive. So who better to ask what the intent of a particular passage or paragraph was? And the other thing that distinguishes the NGC process, of course, from the regular grievance process, is that decisions are based on the intent of the provision contained in the directive rather than the letter of the law. And I'll get back to that in a minute. So grievances are handled in a 3-step process, which is sometimes similar, sometimes different from the departmental process, depending on which department we're talking about. The final level, though, being the executive committee that I was referencing earlier. So the executive committee, based on the advice from the, that was gathered during the hearing, will make its final decision and dispose of the grievance. However, as a caveat, if grievances are denied or they're at impasse, because sometimes the parties do agree to disagree, they can't come to a resolution, so they arrive at an impasse. Those situations do allow, with the support of the bargaining agent, of course, the individual to take their grievance forward to the Federal Public Sector Labor Relations and Employment Board. With regards to the dental and the DI plans, I guess I wanted to mention the distinction there is this not an in-person hearing, but rather it's a file review. So the information, all the medical information is looked at by folks that have expert knowledge of these things. And again, there too, it's the people are there have been resourced from the sides. There's a neutral chairperson, and they look at the individual's cases based on the evidence, factual evidence as provided. And they are the final instance in the the appeal process. Like each of the DI or dental care providers, whether Canada Life or Sun Life, do have an internal appeal process, but the NJC process is the final level. And they do abide, both of those companies do abide by the final level decision made by the NJC. There's a process that's called request for interpretation. That's where basically somebody can write in and say, I'm not sure how this directive should be applied. This provision in the directive should be applied. And then the folks that have written the directive will then turn around and have a discussion, clarify the intent, and send that back to the requestor. Just back on intent for a minute, just to put it into a tangible example for you, because often people say, what do you mean by intent? So if I take the travel directive, for example, and someone puts in a request for bottled water as a result of the fact they had to buy bottled water when they were traveling, the intent really is not to provide bottled water, but I mean it's so that the individual stays hydrated. So folks have said, if you're in a travel situation, there's no water, potable water available to, or you're in transit for a very long time, or all different scenarios, it would be reasonable to expect that folks would be reimbursed for bottled water. So, if I'm away for a week in Alaska, maybe I'm only buying 7 bottles of water. But if I'm away a week in, Egypt, maybe I'm going to buy 24 bottles of water. The point being, the intent is that someone should, be no more disadvantaged and be able to stay hydrated when they're traveling. So I'll leave it at that for now. And then I guess just turn it back over to you, Danny. I think that pretty wraps up very quickly. I know some of the finer points around the NJC, but I'm happy to take questions. Merci.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate the fact you kept it high level, because we could have talked about this for all day if we wanted to, but I think we're ready to move over with the questions. So I forgot to mention this. If you want to ask questions to Sean, you can do so via Slido, and I see some of you already remember how to do this because there's already questions on there. So you go to slido.com. You go to ACFO-ACAF, that's your code. So slido.com, le code ACFO-ACAF. Vous pouvez poser vos questions. And before we go to the questions, I want to give you, Sean gave a very concrete example, and I love what you gave there here. What's the intent, right? We always write policies, but we cannot think of every possible scenario. By going back to the intent, that's what it's all about. Another one we explored recently was under the travel directive, we reimburse people with a kilometric rate, right? And the intent there is to make sure no one is out of pocket if you're using your personal vehicle. And one of the files that was put in is that when you're calculating how many kilometers are between point A to point B, there are certain, I don't know if it's Google Maps or another application, doesn't necessarily take into account altitude, right? So if it's a straight line, the same level, say it might be, I don't know, like 1 kilometer, but if you're going into an angle, maybe it takes you longer because that line is longer, right? So we have to go back and say, all right, someone might say, well, who cares? Not that much big of a difference. Well, no, the intent here of the directive is to make sure that people are not being penalized for using their personal vehicles. So we have to go back and maybe rework the policy or adjust things, because words are words, but what was the point of the words in the first place? So I should point that out. I think intent is really important. One last thing before we go to the questions. Here's a great example of the importance of the NJC. So when COVID hit back in March, we quickly had to all the presidents get together. Now we can do this on our side. We do this on a regular basis. But when all the presidents need to talk to the employer at TBS and at Okro, we need to have a mechanism to formally engage and have that dialogue, right? So that's when we can go through the NJC and Sean's team, where they will book the meetings, the rooms, facilitate the audio video to ensure that we can have that dialogue. And we've been meeting every single week since COVID hit to update on, okay, what's going on with the 699 leave? What's going on with the return to work procedures and protocol? So we need that mechanism where we can quickly all get in contact, both on the bargaining agents, which are the unions, and the employer side. And as Sean mentioned, there's multiple bargaining agents, right? I think there's 19 now. There's bargaining agents that represent over 170,000 members. And there are some that have very few, like less than a dozen. So there's different sizes. And the reason why that is because we represent different members. So every single bargaining agent has the right to a vote when we're talking about the NGC. Doesn't matter the size. It's really every unit has its own separate vote. All right, let's go to the questions. Sean, this is your first time here. So we have on slide a question that a PRR members can actually vote them up. If ever you see a question you'd like to take or maybe add on to something I say, please let me know. The first question we have on here is, how can we request changes to the healthcare plan? And I like that question because we actually get this question a lot. Let's be frank here, friends. I'm telling you this because I think it's true. Our healthcare plan is not the best. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's not the best. And your healthcare plan is not negotiated through your collective agreement. I wish it were, but it's not. It's same thing for your dental. It's not. It goes through the National Joint Council through what's called cyclical reviews. So this is not something that gets reviewed every year because it's a lot of work that goes into this. The window is now open right now to negotiate this contract. You might not know this, but back in 2017, ACFO sent an email to our members and we said, hey, the window will reopen soon to negotiate this. What would you like to see improved in your healthcare plan? That's really what we ask you guys, because remember, ACFO is there to represent your best interest. So we got that feedback. We got lots of feedback because when it comes to healthcare, people have different needs at different times of their life, right? If you're 25 or 55, you don't have the same healthcare needs, completely different. So we have to take all of that in and provide the feedback with all the other unions, and then we negotiate with the employer. And that's where we are at right now. We are going to list our proposals to the employer. They will give us theirs as well. And I can give you this as a scoop. It's no surprise. One of the big things the employer would like to do is try to have the generic drugs instead of the brand one, because it saves a lot of money, right? So in certain circumstances, when your doctor's prescribing the brand name, you might not need the brand name. You can go generic, and as a whole on the plan, the employer could save a lot of money. Now, we understand why the employer wants to do that, but we want to make sure that those savings are then reinvested into the community. So really, the healthcare plan, dental plan is negotiated with the other bargaining agents and the employer through the cyclical review. And maybe, Sean, you can talk about more of this cyclical review, how we establish a plan, and how that gets done. Sean?
I'd love to. So thanks for all that, Danny. One of the things that I appreciate you taking the time to talk about is how the NGC is structured. I'm always fascinated by the fact that, how democratic it is in that, like you said, no matter the size of the union, there's one union, one vote, which I think is a tremendous asset, especially if you're a smaller union and trying to go at this. And also the other value added is that rather than have to negotiate 27 different travel directives, one for each bargaining unit, it's way more efficient to have a common table where these things get discussed. But also it creates the equity and parity, I think, that we would expect. So if I'm an EX or someone is a CR or an FI in your case, everybody gets treated the same way relative to their expenses, for example, for travel, as they should, because we're all, serving a common purpose. It's not dictated by our level. So I always thought that that's important to share. With regards to the healthcare plan, it is negotiated through the NGC. It is a directive, so it does form part of the collective agreement, albeit it's a bit different in terms of the review process. It's not subject to the cyclical review process as the other directives are. It is open from time to time for renewal. As you've stated, it is happening now. So the membership has already been surveyed. That's great. The other unions are doing that, and the proposals are being put forward. The employer is doing the same thing. That then gets discussed around a partners committee table, which is again under the NJC's umbrella. So the partners committee is made up of, again, union representation and on the other side, the employer and the National Association of Federal Retirees, because of course retirees make up a big proportion of the plan membership. And essentially, they will then look through the common interest and come up with a recommendation to the president of the Treasury Board on changes for the plan. It's been a while since the last renewal. I'm not surprised that members are interested in finding out when this is going to happen, hopefully sooner than later. But that's the process. So over time, basically things evolve. But the Partners Committee was also intended to be a little bit more reactive, in the sense that if there was a real deficiency with the plan, and there have been a few examples of these things, in vitro fertilization, for example, coverage is one that comes to mind. It's something that eventually in the last couple of years was changed as a result of, pressure is probably not the right word, but essentially the membership collectively bringing forward as something of a high interest. Point being, they are established to make changes on an ongoing basis, not necessarily at a point of time. It just happens that because it's been a while since there's been a conversation, there's probably more proposals on the table now than there not. But so to answer the question in terms of how the membership can be heard, I think you're already on it. It's through the union that basically these proposals will make themselves heard at the Partners Committee. My role at the Partners Committee, again, is the neutral, to facilitate that conversation, to provide advice, guidance on the process and the procedures to the parties, and to make sure that they are talking.
Thanks for that, Sean. I think you bring up a good point there, that the NGC, like you don't decide anything, right? You're just the mediator in between to ensure that there is a fair process, and then you let the process take its course. But it's very crucial to understand that we need someone that is there neutral, not in favor of the employer or the bargaining agents, but there as neutral. And for those of you that are curious, so we asked for your input back in 2017 because we know the window would reopen, right? And the reason why it takes so long to negotiate this is because it is complicated. Also, it is costly. Every single coverage that we increase by, obviously the employer needs to cost this and see, all right, what can we afford? What can we do? And people have very different needs. I will tell you, I'm going off memory here, the top 5 requests from ACFO members, the overwhelming favorite was for vision care, right? $275 doesn't get you anything these days. So we're trying to get that increased to $500. Second one was massages. So we're trying to increase that as well. $300 was not enough. We want to have more. There was for drug coverage, so 80% coverage, trying to increase that one. And there was physiotherapy coverage. And the last one, which is not really a request, which you can actually do now, was online submission, right? Get rid of the paperwork so we can submit everything online. Now, those were the top 5 requests, but other than that, there were hundreds of different other requests. And they're not necessarily looked through the lens of what is most popular, because if you can understand, if there's a drug out there that could potentially save your life or your child's life, but is a very rare disease that only applies to a very handful of people, it wouldn't be the most popular request from our members, but that is life-changing, not only to save the person, to keep them in life, but also financially to not go bankrupt, right? So these are all the little nuances we need to look at. But again, from the employer standpoint, everything has to be costed out. And that's why when we bring something forward, we have to talk to the other unions and say, all right, we can't put forward 1,000 requests here. We're going to have to narrow it down. So we have to make decisions. That's why we ask for your input to see what's really our members, what's important to them, what they're asking for. This one, I'll ask for your thoughts on this one, on the inflation. Why does the bilingual bonus not increase with inflation? I have my thoughts, but I'll throw it over to you. Your thoughts, Sean, on that one.
That's a great question. Bilingual bonus does come up quite a bit in conversation. And rightly so. It's a directive that applies to many of us. It hasn't really changed in a number of years. And again, I think the short answer to that question is that it's part of a negotiations process. It's included in the collective agreement, and the parties had set out a quantum years ago at the establish the basis for it, and it just has not been reviewed. I think that's a suggestion perhaps that the unions might want to put forward next time the directive is open for a review. It's not being reviewed this year. We look at the cyclical review calendar every year, so the council looks at all the different directives, when were they last reopened, decides which ones need to be reopened, and then move that process forward. So there's always opportunity, of course, through executive committee and then later by council to have the conversation on the need. The conversation, once, has been decided that a directive is reopened, then it goes to that working committee I was talking about, and then through those discussions would be an opportunity to propose a change like that one.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I agree with you. Like, this is a question we get a lot, right? Think about this. The $800 hasn't changed in 30 years. So it's completely outdated. It's similar to wages, right? Wages should increase every year by inflation. The whole point of inflation is to ensure you maintain your purchasing power. It's not really an increase. It's just to ensure that the dollars that are given to me at that time, where I'm not losing any money through time. So $800 30 years ago is not they're worth the same thing today. So this is something that we definitely, all the unions agree that it should be increased. And depending who's in power, we have different versions of this, because obviously this was cost the employer a lot of money, right? So I could see why they're hesitant. So it's something that's on it's on the radar for sure. I can tell you that. We want to talk about this one. Why does the NGC negotiate our health plans, not the union? We've already answered this one, so I'll skip that one. Sean, you can take this one. How many employees work at the NGC? Are there employees, public servants?
Hey, that's a great question. Thank you. It's interesting because it allows me to talk a bit about my role, in fact. So to answer the simple part of that, there are about 9 people at the NGC Secretariat. So we're small but mighty secretariat. I always say it's interesting. We have 9 employees, but we serve a population of about 240,000 employees. So the magnitude is there. But what's interesting with my role as General Secretary, it's built into the NGC Constitution that the role will rotate between the employer side and the bargaining agent side every 5 years. So what I mean by that is the person that occupied my job, because I've been in this role now roughly 2 years, was previously selected by the bargaining agents to carry out the functions. So at the end of her mandate, then it reverted back to the employer. They had a process, and then I was put forward and approved by the bargaining agents to take on the role for the next 5 years, and so on and so forth. So it's really interesting, and I think unique again to government. The folks that do work for me and my secretariat are full-time employees of the public service. They're mostly excluded or non-represented given the work we do. And they are mostly, there's some administrative staff for sure, but most of them are PE, so work in labor relations with that background in particular.
Thanks, Sean. It's always fascinating to see, and you get to meet the people, right? So again, when I was just an FI doing my work, I really didn't get to know as much as I do now about the NGC, but understanding the key role that they play, it's why we really think it's important for you guys to know that there's so many different layers. And that actually leads me to the next question, which was, it's gone down. So when I file a grievance, does it go to the NGC, right? And Sean, I'll let you give your thoughts on this. I think the easy answer is no, it doesn't, but it might, right? Sean, your thoughts on this one?
It would only in the sense that if it was a grievance relative to one of the NGC products, of course, and if that were the case, it would need the support from the union. I mean, I'll take that as a given. And so it gets heard initially. There are 2 steps internally at the departmental level, and hopefully like those things can get resolved early on and never make it to the final level at the NGC. So there's obviously the first level is with the your line management type of role individual. The next one is with a person is called the Departmental Liaison Officer. So the Departmental Liaison Officer is the person that's been identified in each department to deal specifically with the NGC process, hear the grievances, respond to those grievances, and transmit those grievances. So essentially, if you have a grievance relative to the travel directive, relocation directive, foreign service, one of those ones, you will find potentially it's all the way up to us. We hear on average about 50 to 60 final levels a year. So it's not like there are a lot that make it. Most of them, there are many, many more that are filed, but a lot of them get dealt with through the process of discussion at your level, Danny, or with your representatives, of course. So that's good.
Yeah, that's the thing, right, Sean? We at ACFO really try our best to only use a grievance as our very last recourse. Because again, when you file a grievance, it's going to take years typically, and you lose control of the process, right? What I mean by that is you are no longer pleading your own case here, right? Someone else goes and people decide on your behalf, and you don't control the outcome either. So for us, when we discuss things with the employer, it's the best case scenario to find you the best deal. And the NJC only gets involved when it's the very last recourse, right? Where you go in the highest level. And by then you've already waited at least months, if not years, before it gets heard. So we'd much rather settle this, because when you file a grievance, you're still there working. And sometimes because you, I don't know, you were feeling harassed, you didn't get a fair deal, your PMA, what it could be, for whatever reason, there's still people behind this that are trying to do their day-to-day job. So the quicker we can find a resolution, the better it is for everyone, not just for you, but for the employer and for the resources. So that's why we really try to avoid those grievances. But we will file them if we need to, though. Sean, next question. Can employees attend NJC meetings as observers? Or maybe they mean hearings as well here. Thoughts on that?
Generally speaking, if you have filed a grievance and it's going before, at a hearing before one of our working committees, you'll be represented by your union representative, of course, but you can, as the grievor, attend if you want. It's not something that happens very often. Generally, people rely on the representatives to, put their best case forward. If you were to attend, however, I guess there'd be a caveat, would be like it's either you speak on your behalf or your representative does. But I see here it's more of an observer issue. It can happen. Generally, would want to give the committee a heads up that somebody else will be in the room. But generally, I have not seen instances where that's been that request has been refused.
Yeah, to the person that answered that posed this question, if ever you'd like to attend, not necessarily an NJC meeting, but just a hearing, those are open to the public. So you can email us at ACFO. We can let you know next time there is a hearing. And when it becomes public, this is something you can do. So I would definitely recommend attending one of these, because it's a very formal process. And again, that's why we say we try to avoid filing grievances, because it becomes so technical and so formal that we lose the opportunity to think outside the box and think of ways to fix this. And instead of this, we're waiting years. I've seen, grievances last 3-5 years, and at the end, no one got what they wanted. So you're much better when you can control the outcome. But I can see where the question is coming from in terms of just seeing how the process folds. Next question, Sean. Would NGC do anything to ensure our health and safety when return to work in the office? I have my thoughts on that, but I'll throw it to you first, Sean.
Okay.
Oh, is it coming up?
Okay, there we go. Back. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. Like I said, there have been discussions ongoing through the NJC and all of the unions and the Treasury Board as employer in terms of what would the conditions be. What are the requirements to ensure everybody's health and safety when, in fact, it is declared safe to return to the physical workspace. So we continue to play that role. But I think by extension, the NJC Occupational Health and Safety Directives and our interaction with the policy committees, which is really where all this stuff is being discussed. So we have what we call a service-wide occupational health and safety committee. They look at the policy angles, and they've been very active, and they've actually put out a few different bulletins in terms of, how things should best be done, requirements under the Canada Labor Code, that sort of thing. And they continue to keep a really close eye on monitoring and providing that advice and guidance. So that's the influence that we would have.
Yeah, and I think also, Sean, you talked about this. There's many hats that the NJC plays, and if one is that collaboration, I remember because Sean's team is the ones that sets up these meetings. We had a really in-depth conversation about that return to work protocol that was sent from the Chief Human Resources Office. It was a lot of back and forth. Sometimes we have difficult conversations because we're on different sides, right? The employer is there to ensure that they respect the employees and do what they think is reasonable to ensure safety. And we're there really from the member standpoint to bring up our concerns. And sometimes we don't always agree, but that's okay. We understand that we represent different interests. But at the end of the day, we've had a chance to discuss this, and then we have different recourses at our disposal to escalate if we need. But I think Regarding the return to work, did the NGC play a role? Yes. Without the NGC, we could not have as quickly established all these meetings. And it's not just the meetings, the relationships we have through the NGC to know who's who and say, all right, what can we do here to ease the restrictions, return to work? What's the best protocol? So yeah, they were definitely helpful on that one. Next question, what is the statute of limitations for interpretation requests? I mean, I know Sean's not a lawyer here either, so maybe this one's best set for to contact here at ACFO. If you have a specific, I'm assuming this is referring to a specific item, best to contact us so we can actually look at the details. But I don't know, Sean, do you have an idea of what is the statute of limitation for interpretation request? Or?
Yeah, I guess the way I would look at that or interpret that is essentially, first of all, these requests for interpretation should be funneled to us through the representative. So as you say, through your folks, and on the employer side, it would come in through, representative of the employer to then myself, actually, and then I will look at it and either the executive committee or the working committee would supply the response. Now the response would be conditioned or in line with a provision in the collective, in the directive in particular that we're, it's related there too. So it would simply again state, like it would be like if some person said, I don't know about how the environment allowance applies to me under the Essex Post Government Housing Directive. What was the intent when this was developed? And that would be as far as they would go. They're not going to speculate outside of that. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you, Sean. I mean, whoever wrote this one, please contact us. We can actually look into the case and see what we can do. That's why these are difficult sometimes because we need more details to actually see what we can do for you guys. Sean, the last two, maybe I'll just take quickly here. One of them actually refers to the relocations. I'll take the other one. Can we have a paragraph on coordination of benefits where the insured is a primary on two plans in the next round of negotiations? Although we've already gathered the input from our members, if you do want to see something changed in your healthcare plan, dental plan, when it comes to the NGC, I think there's really 5 that apply to you guys, right? So the bilingual bonus applies to us. The travel directive for you guys. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of more directives that are out there, but for our members, the CT group, the more relevant with that one. And then there's the dental plan, healthcare plan, and disability. Those are really the ones I think you will at some point in your career be affected by. So those are the ones that you might want to see improvements done. So although we've gathered up all the information, at any point in time when you see something either in your collective agreement or at the NJC level that you'd like to see improved, we always collect them. So it's not as if there's a specific window and then that's it, that's done. The collection process always happens. So for that person, definitely you can submit that over to us in writing. Regarding ACFO members' input on dental care plan, I may have missed this info. If said, will ACFO be sending surveys request to members? Yes, prior to a window reopening, we always send you guys an email with a reminder saying, hey, this is the time to provide your input, so let us know. So that was already sent out before. But again, as I just said, anytime you want to improve something, it's never too late. You can always send it out. And for our last question here, I like this one because I could see it's one of our members. It makes sense from a numbers standpoint. A question is, my friend brought my furniture for my relocation. It cost less than using movers. I provided him an ESO card as a thank you. BGRS denied it. I'm assuming that's some inner thing. Why is there's no flex? So I get where you're coming from, right? You said, hey, I paid my buddy $50. He has a pickup truck to relocate my stuff. And then I just like to get that $50 paid back because it's a gift card, ESO card. So it makes sense. It's a washout, right? The reason why it's much more difficult for the employer to accept that is because a couple of reasons. First of all, was it pre-approved? You can't spend money in the government without having the pre-approval first, right? The second one is optics and politics. So if a public servant spends $50 on an ESO card, I know what the cost was, whatever it was, we don't know now if that was actually used to give to your friend or did you use that personally, right? I'm not saying that you actually was fraud here, but there is potential for fraud. And the last one is the optics of it. What does it look like when the federal government is paying people for ESO cards? I know it wasn't used for ESO card, but when it's coded in the system, there would be, it's a gas receipt invoice, right? That's the invoice, what it is for. So in this particular case, contact us at ACFO. We'll see what we can do. It'll be more difficult, I'll be honest with you guys, unless your department has already said, that they would consider subcosting other elements to ensure that you can actually get your material more quicker. But I love the example here because, you know, mathematically wise, it's the same thing, but there's always the approvals, the optics, and the internal controls. On that, friends, this completes our session on the National Joint Council. I would like to thank our guest, Sean Ross. I think it was very enlightening. And again, if you want to refer to this at any point in time, we'll get putting this on our website. And if ever you have any questions for Sean or the NGC, we'll share the information with you as well, so you can get a hold of them. Next week, well, we'll be actually for the rest of the next 2 weeks, we're still going to be doing Wednesday webinars. And I'll have some information for you guys regarding telework and what if you work in a different province than you do that you live in a province, right? So there's tax implications there. But I don't have the answer yet, but I know I'll have it soon. So until then, stay safe, friends. We'll see you next Wednesday. Bye-bye.